The desert wind carried more than sand that night. It carried the weight of a mission that would change everything for Team Alpha. Marcus Chen adjusted his night vision goggles and checked his watch for the 10th time in 5 minutes. The green glow showed 0347 hours, 3 minutes past their scheduled checkpoint, and Rodriguez still hadn't made contact. Team Alpha had been operating in the Rocky Mountains of Afghanistan for 6 days straight. Their mission was supposed to be simple: locate and eliminate a high-value target who had been coordinating attacks on coalition forces. Intelligence suggested the target, known only as the Wolf, was hiding in a compound nestled between 2 steep cliffs about 12 miles from the Pakistani border. Marcus, a 28-year-old Navy SEAL from San Francisco, had led dozens of missions like this. But something felt different tonight. The usual chatter from his team was absent. Even Johnson, who normally couldn't stop talking about his girlfriend back home, was unusually quiet as he monitored the radio frequencies. The team consisted of 6 men, each with specialized skills that made them deadly effective. There was Thompson, the explosives expert who could turn a paperclip into a bomb if needed. Williams handled communications and could hack into almost any system within minutes. Davis was their medic, but his real talent was reading people and situations before they went bad. And then there was Rodriguez, their sniper, positioned on a ridge about 800 meters away. Rodriguez was different from the others. He rarely spoke during missions, communicating mostly through hand signals and brief radio transmissions. The 32-year-old former Marine had joined the SEALs 3 years ago, but his background before that remained mostly unknown. What the team did know was that Rodriguez could make impossible shots in conditions that would challenge even veteran marksmen. The compound below them looked peaceful in the moonlight. Too peaceful. Marcus studied the building through his scope, counting windows and noting potential escape routes. Intelligence reports indicated 12 to 15 hostile combatants were inside, along with their target. But the place looked empty, almost abandoned. "Overwatch, this is Alpha Leader. Report status," Marcus whispered into his radio. "Silence, Rodriguez, come in." He tried again, using their sniper's call sign. Still nothing. Johnson looked up from his radio equipment, concern evident even in the darkness. "Boss, I'm getting interference on all channels. Someone's jamming our communications." Marcus felt his stomach tighten. Communications jamming meant their mission had been compromised. Either someone had leaked their location, or they had walked into a trap. He signaled for the team to move to a more defensive position behind a cluster of large rocks. As they repositioned, Davis grabbed Marcus's arm. "Movement, 2 o'clock, about 300 meters. Marcus swung his rifle toward the indicated direction. Through his scope, he could see figures moving across the rocky terrain. They were dressed in local clothing, but their movement patterns were too coordinated, too professional. These weren't local farmers or herders. "Count 12 hostiles moving toward our position," Marcus reported to his team. "They know we're here." Thompson was already preparing charges while Williams worked frantically to restore communications. But Marcus knew they were running out of time. The hostiles would reach their position within minutes, and without Rodriguez providing overwatch, they would be vulnerable to attack from multiple directions. That's when they heard it. A single rifle shot echoing across the valley. The shot came from Rodriguez's position on the ridge, but it wasn't aimed at the approaching hostiles. Instead, it seemed to come from much farther away, from a completely different direction. Marcus tried to make sense of what was happening. Had Rodriguez spotted additional threats? Was he engaging targets they couldn't see? Another shot rang out, then another. Each one precise and deliberate, but still not directed at the immediate threat approaching their position. The hostiles had stopped advancing and were now taking cover, apparently as confused as Marcus's team about where the shots were coming from. Williams suddenly got a burst of clear communication through his equipment. "Alpha Leader, this is Command. Be advised, we have multiple heat signatures moving in your area. Recommend immediate extraction. Command, we're compromised and taking fire from unknown shooter. Rodriguez is not responding. Request immediate air support. Negative on air support. Weather conditions too dangerous for helicopter operations. You're on your own until dawn." Marcus looked at his men. They were professional soldiers, but he could see the tension in their faces. Being cut off from support in hostile territory was every operator's nightmare. Worse, they still didn't know what had happened to Rodriguez or who was firing from his position. The shooting stopped as suddenly as it had started. The valley fell silent except for the wind whistling through the rocks. The hostiles had disappeared, melting back into the landscape like ghosts, but Marcus knew they were still out there waiting. We need to reach Rodriguez's position, Marcus decided. Whatever happened up there, we can't leave him behind. Davis shook his head. That's exactly what they want us to do. Move into the open where they can pick us off. Rodriguez is our teammate, Marcus said firmly. We don't leave people behind. As they prepared to move, Williams picked up another transmission. This one wasn't from command. It was a voice they didn't recognize, speaking in accented English. American soldiers. We have your sniper. Come to the compound if you want him back alive. The message sent chills through the team. Rodriguez had been captured, which meant their overwatch was gone and their teammate was in enemy hands. But something didn't make sense. If the enemy had Rodriguez, who had been firing from his position, Marcus made a decision that would haunt him for years to come. Instead of heading toward the compound as the voice demanded, he ordered his team to circle around to Rodriguez's position on the ridge. They needed to know what had really happened before walking into what was obviously a trap. The climb up the rocky slope took 45 minutes, with the team moving carefully to avoid detection. When they finally reached Rodriguez's position, what they found changed everything they thought they knew about their mission and their teammate. Rodriguez's equipment was there. His rifle, his pack, even his radio were all positioned exactly where they should be, but Rodriguez himself was nowhere to be found. More disturbing were the brass casings scattered around the position. Too many casings. Rodriguez was a precise shooter who rarely wasted ammunition, but there were at least 20 spent rounds on the ground. Marcus picked up one of the casings and examined it closely. The markings were wrong. These weren't from Rodriguez's rifle. Someone else had been shooting from this position, someone with different equipment and different intentions. As dawn began to break over the mountains, Marcus realized they weren't just dealing with a compromised mission. They were caught in the middle of something much more complex and dangerous than anyone had anticipated. The morning sun revealed details that the darkness had hidden. Marcus knelt beside Rodriguez's abandoned position, studying the ground more carefully. The footprints told a story that made his blood run cold. Rodriguez's boots showed signs of a struggle, but there were other prints too. Larger boots, military style but not standard issue for any force they knew operated in this region. Thompson moved quietly around the perimeter, his trained eye picking up details the others might miss. "Boss, take a look at this," he called softly, pointing to a section of disturbed earth about 10 feet from Rodriguez's position. Marcus crawled over and saw what Thompson had discovered. Someone had dug a shallow hole and covered it hastily with loose rocks and dirt. Inside, they found Rodriguez's personal equipment, his sidearm, his night vision goggles, and most importantly, his identification tags. Why would they leave his gear but take him? Davis asked, voicing what they were all thinking. Williams was monitoring radio frequencies, trying to pick up any communications that might give them clues about Rodriguez's location. Suddenly, his eyes widened. "I'm getting chatter on a frequency that's not supposed to exist out here. Someone's using military encryption, but it's not ours." Marcus moved closer to listen. Through the static, he could make out fragments of conversation in English, but with accents he couldn't place. The words were technical, discussing positions and movements with the precision of trained soldiers. "Can you get a clearer signal?" Marcus asked. Williams adjusted his equipment, and suddenly the voices became crystal clear. What they heard made them question everything they thought they knew about their mission. Package is secure. Subject is cooperative and providing valuable intelligence about American operations in the region. Confirmed. Phase 2 can proceed as planned. The decoy worked perfectly. What about the rest of his team? They're exactly where we want them. Monitor their movements, but do not engage unless absolutely necessary. Marcus felt sick. Rodriguez wasn't just captured. He was apparently cooperating with the enemy, but that didn't make sense. Rodriguez had been through the same training, the same loyalty tests, the same security clearances as the rest of them. Johnson, who had been silent since they reached the ridge, finally spoke up. "There's something else. I've been thinking about Rodriguez's shooting last night. Those shots weren't random. They were precise, deliberate, like he was targeting specific individuals." "What are you saying?" Marcus asked, though he was beginning to suspect the answer. I'm saying maybe Rodriguez wasn't captured. Maybe he's exactly where he wants to be. The possibility that Rodriguez had betrayed them was almost too horrible to consider, but the evidence was mounting. The abandoned equipment arranged too neatly, the lack of signs of a real struggle, the radio intercepts suggesting cooperation rather than coercion. Thompson pulled out a map and spread it on the ground. If Rodriguez has been feeding them information about our operations, they would know our exact route, our timing, our capabilities. This whole mission could have been a setup from the beginning. Marcus studied the map, tracing their route from the insertion point to their current position. Every checkpoint, every decision point was marked clearly. If someone had access to their mission planning, the enemy could have anticipated every move they made. But something still didn't fit. Marcus had served with Rodriguez for 18 months. They had saved each other's lives multiple times. Rodriguez had risked everything to pull Davis out of a firefight in Syria. He had given up his own water to keep Johnson from dehydrating during a mission in Iraq. The idea that he would betray his teammates seemed impossible. Williams interrupted his thoughts. "Boss, I'm picking up movement in the valley. Looks like a convoy heading toward the compound." Through their scopes, they could see 3 vehicles moving along the rough road toward the target building. The convoy was too organized, too well coordinated to be a coincidence. Someone was orchestrating events with military precision. "We need to get closer to that compound," Marcus decided. "Whatever's happening, Rodriguez is at the center of it. Dead or alive, betrayer or victim, we're not leaving without him." Davis checked his medical supplies while Thompson inventoried their remaining ammunition. They had enough for one major engagement, but if they got pinned down, they would be in serious trouble. As they prepared to move, Marcus noticed something glinting in the morning sunlight near Rodriguez's position. He crawled over and found a small piece of metal, partially buried under some loose stones. It was a spent bullet, but not from any weapon his team carried. The bullet was unusual, clearly custom-made and expensive. The kind of ammunition used by professional snipers who could afford the best equipment money could buy. Marcus had seen similar rounds before, but only in the hands of elite operators from various special forces around the world. "This changes things," Marcus told his team, showing them the bullet. "Whoever was shooting from Rodriguez's position last night wasn't using standard military equipment. This is professional grade, probably custom loaded for extreme accuracy." Williams looked puzzled. But if Rodriguez was captured, who was doing the shooting? "Maybe Rodriguez wasn't the only sniper on this mountain last night," Thompson suggested. The implications were staggering. If there had been another sniper operating in the area, someone skilled enough to use Rodriguez's position and equipment, it meant they were dealing with forces far more sophisticated than simple insurgents or even well-trained terrorists. Marcus made a decision that went against every instinct and regulation he had been taught. Instead of calling for extraction, he decided to continue the mission. But now their objective had changed. They weren't just looking for the original target anymore. They needed to find Rodriguez and discover who was really pulling the strings in this operation. The descent toward the compound was treacherous, with loose rocks threatening to send them tumbling down the mountainside. They moved in single file, communicating only through hand signals, acutely aware that they were probably being watched. Halfway down, Davis spotted something that made them all freeze. Through his binoculars, he could see a figure on the roof of the compound. The person was dressed in local clothing, but the way he moved, the way he held his weapon, everything about his posture screamed professional soldier. More disturbing was what the figure was holding. Even at a distance, they could see he was carrying a rifle identical to Rodriguez's, with the same modifications and scope setup that Rodriguez had customized over months of careful adjustment. "That's Rodriguez's rifle," Johnson whispered, confirming what they were all thinking, but the person holding it was too tall to be Rodriguez, too broad in the shoulders. Someone else was using their teammate's weapon, someone who knew enough about Rodriguez's equipment to operate it effectively. As they watched, the figure on the roof raised the rifle and seemed to be scanning the mountainside, not randomly, but methodically, like someone who knew exactly where to look, like someone who knew where they were hiding. Marcus realized with growing horror that they weren't the hunters in this situation. They were the prey, and they had been from the moment they set foot in this valley. Someone had been playing a game with them, using Rodriguez as bait and their loyalty as a weapon against them. The question that haunted Marcus as they continued their approach was simple. but terrifying. Was Rodriguez a willing participant in this game, or was he just another piece being moved around the board by forces beyond his control? The compound sat in an unnatural silence as Team Alpha approached from the eastern slope. Marcus had expected sentries, patrol patterns, some sign of defensive preparation. Instead, the building looked almost abandoned, with only occasional movement visible through the windows. It felt like walking into a carefully constructed stage set. Williams tapped Marcus on the shoulder and pointed to his radio equipment. He had intercepted another transmission, this one much clearer than before. The voice was unmistakably Rodriguez, but what he was saying made Marcus's stomach clench with dread. Targets are approximately 200 meters from the eastern approach. They're moving exactly as predicted. Alpha Leader is maintaining formation protocols despite obvious tactical disadvantages. Rodriguez wasn't just cooperating with the enemy. He was actively providing real-time intelligence about his own team's movements. The betrayal cut deeper than Marcus had imagined possible. Thompson, who had been Rodriguez's closest friend on the team, looked like he had been physically struck. "That son of a bitch knows every move we're going to make before we make it," he whispered bitterly. But Davis, ever the observer of human behavior, raised a troubling point. Listen to his voice carefully. Something's not right. Rodriguez sounds different, like he's reading from a script. Marcus focused on the radio intercept, trying to analyze Rodriguez's tone and speech patterns. Davis was right. Rodriguez normally spoke with natural pauses and inflections, but this transmission sounded rehearsed, almost mechanical. "You think he's being coerced?" Johnson asked. "Or worse," Davis replied. "What if someone's feeding him exactly what to say? What if he doesn't even know the real purpose of what he's doing?" The possibility that Rodriguez was being manipulated rather than genuinely betraying them provided some comfort, but it didn't change their tactical situation. Whether willing or unwilling, Rodriguez was providing information that could get them all killed. Marcus decided to test a theory. Instead of continuing their eastern approach as Rodriguez had reported, he signaled for the team to circle around to the south. If Rodriguez was being forced to provide intelligence, this change in direction might reveal how much control his captors really had over the situation. The southern approach was more exposed, with less cover and longer sightlines that would make them vulnerable to sniper fire. But it also offered something the eastern route didn't: a clear view of the compound's rear entrance and what appeared to be a small communications array on the roof. As they repositioned, Williams picked up another transmission. This time the voice wasn't Rodriguez's. "Subject reports targets moving south." This was not anticipated. "Adjust positions accordingly. Should we activate contingency protocols?" "Negative. Continue observation." The subject's value diminishes if his teammates suspect deliberate misdirection. Marcus realized they were caught in a psychological operation more sophisticated than anything he had encountered in 8 years of special operations. Someone was using Rodriguez not just as a source of intelligence, but as a way to manipulate Team Alpha's behavior and decisions. Thompson studied the compound through his scope, noting details that hadn't been visible from their previous position. "Boss, there's something you need to see. That communications equipment on the roof? It's not standard insurgent gear. That's military-grade satellite communication equipment, probably worth more than most people make in a lifetime." The implications were clear. They weren't dealing with local fighters or even well-funded terrorists. This operation had the backing of a nation-state or a very well-resourced private military organization. Williams continued monitoring communications and discovered something even more disturbing. The frequencies being used weren't just sophisticated. They were using encryption protocols that he recognized from classified intelligence briefings. Someone with access to highly sensitive military technology was running this operation. "This is way above our pay grade," Johnson muttered, voicing what they were all thinking. Marcus knew Johnson was right, but he also knew they couldn't simply walk away. Rodriguez was still their teammate, and regardless of the larger implications, they had a duty to try to extract him. As they watched the compound, a figure emerged from the building. Even at a distance, Marcus recognized Rodriguez's walk, the way he carried his shoulders, the slight favor he showed his left leg from an old training injury. But something was wrong with the picture. Rodriguez was walking freely without visible restraints or guards. He moved to the communications array and began adjusting the equipment with the confidence of someone who knew exactly what he was doing. There was no sign of coercion, no indication that he was acting against his will. Maybe we've been wrong about this whole thing, Davis said quietly. Maybe Rodriguez isn't a victim at all. The thought was devastating, but Marcus forced himself to consider it objectively. If Rodriguez had voluntarily joined forces with whoever was running this operation, it would explain many of the inconsistencies they had observed. The carefully staged equipment at his position, the precision of the intelligence being provided, the sophisticated nature of the entire setup. But there was still something that didn't fit. Marcus knew Rodriguez better than anyone on the team, and deliberate betrayal simply wasn't consistent with the man's character. Rodriguez had risked his life too many times, saved too many teammates, demonstrated too much loyalty for this to be a simple case of turning traitor. Thompson was thinking along similar lines. What if Rodriguez doesn't know he's betraying us? What if someone has convinced him he's working for the good guys? It was a possibility Marcus hadn't considered. Intelligence operations sometimes involved creating false narratives, convincing targets that their actions served legitimate purposes when they actually served enemy interests. If Rodriguez believed he was participating in an authorized operation, he might provide information willingly without realizing the consequences. Williams interrupted their speculation with urgent news. I'm picking up military communications on NATO frequencies. There's a special operations team moving into the area, ETA about 2 hours. Marcus felt a surge of relief. Backup was coming, which meant they could maintain observation and wait for reinforcement before attempting any rescue operation. But Williams's next words shattered that relief. Boss, they're not coming to help us. Based on the communication traffic, they're coming to eliminate all witnesses to this operation, including us. The revelation was like a physical blow. Not only were they dealing with a complex enemy operation, but their own side was apparently willing to sacrifice them to maintain operational security. Marcus realized they were truly on their own, caught between enemy forces and their own military's willingness to accept collateral damage. Davis pulled out a map and began calculating distances and timing. If we're going to get Rodriguez and get out of here, we have less than 2 hours to do it. After that, we'll be fighting both sides. Marcus looked at his team, 4 men who had followed him into impossible situations before, but never anything quite like this. They were outnumbered, outgunned, apparently abandoned by their own command, and facing an enemy that seemed to know their every move before they made it. But they were still Navy SEALs, and they still had a teammate who needed help. Regardless of how complicated the situation had become, Marcus made a decision that would define the rest of his military career and possibly the rest of his life. We're going in, he announced. Whatever Rodriguez has gotten himself into, whatever games are being played here, we're getting our teammate back. And then we're going to find out who's really behind all this. The plan Marcus devised was simple in concept but dangerous in execution. They would split into 2 teams. Thompson and Johnson would create a distraction at the compound's front entrance while Marcus, Davis, and Williams approached from the rear. The goal was to extract Rodriguez quickly and quietly before the incoming special operations team arrived. As they prepared to move, Williams made one final sweep of radio frequencies and discovered something that changed everything. Hidden among the military communications was a civilian emergency beacon, the kind carried by hikers and mountain climbers. The signal was weak and intermittent, but it was coming from inside the compound. Someone else is in there, Williams reported. Someone who's trying to call for help. Marcus studied the building through his binoculars, looking for any sign of additional prisoners or hostages. The compound was larger than it had appeared from a distance, with multiple rooms and what looked like a basement level. If there were other captives, it would complicate their extraction plan significantly. Thompson checked his explosive charges and made a grim calculation. We've got enough ordnance to take down the building, but not if there are innocent people inside. We'll have to do this the hard way. Davis was studying the compound structure, looking for weak points and alternative entry routes. As the team's medic, he was also thinking about potential casualties and extraction procedures if things went wrong. The building's got thick walls, probably reinforced, Davis observed. If we get pinned down inside, it could turn into a siege situation real quick. Marcus knew Davis was right, but they were running out of time. In the distance, he could hear the faint sound of helicopter rotors, still far away but getting closer. The special operations team was ahead of schedule. We move now, Marcus decided. Thompson, Johnson, give us 5 minutes to get into position, then light up the front of the building. Make it loud and obvious, but don't use lethal force unless you're taking fire. We still don't know who all is in there. As Marcus, Davis, and Williams circled around to the rear of the compound, they discovered something unexpected. The back of the building wasn't just a wall. It was built into the mountainside, with what appeared to be natural caves extending behind the structure. The compound was much larger than they had realized. Williams pointed to fresh excavation marks around the cave entrance. Someone's been doing construction work back here, and recently. This isn't just a hiding place. It's a whole underground facility. The implications were staggering. If this was a permanent installation rather than a temporary hideout, it suggested an operation with significant resources and long-term planning. Marcus began to understand why their own command might be willing to eliminate all witnesses, rather than risk exposure of whatever was really happening here. As they approached the rear entrance, Davis spotted something that made them all freeze. Through a small window, they could see Rodriguez sitting at a table with 2 other men. He wasn't restrained, wasn't showing signs of distress, and was actively participating in what appeared to be a planning session. But what shocked Marcus most was one of the other men at the table. Even in profile, he recognized the face from classified briefings. The man was Viktor Petrov, a former Russian Spetsnaz officer who had supposedly been killed in action 3 years earlier in Syria. "That's impossible," Davis whispered. "Petrov's been dead for years." Marcus studied the scene more carefully through his scope. Petrov looked older, scarred, but very much alive. If the reports of his death had been fabricated, it meant intelligence agencies had been tracking the wrong information for years. It also meant they were dealing with someone who had access to the highest levels of international military planning. Williams was monitoring radio traffic and heard Rodriguez's voice again, but this time the transmission was much clearer. What he heard made him grab Marcus's arm urgently. "Alpha Leader, you need to hear this. Rodriguez isn't reporting our position. He's arguing with them about us." Marcus listened to the intercept and realized Williams was right. Rodriguez was speaking forcefully, almost angrily, and his words weren't about Team Alpha's tactical position. "I told you, my team won't fall for a simple ambush. They're too well trained, too experienced. If you want to capture them, you'll need a more sophisticated approach. The parameters of this operation don't require their capture." Petrov's voice responded. "Elimination is acceptable." "That wasn't the deal," Rodriguez shot back. "You promised me they wouldn't be harmed if I cooperated." Marcus felt a mixture of relief and confusion. Rodriguez wasn't betraying them out of malice or ideology. He was trying to protect them, even while working with the enemy. But that raised even more questions about what kind of leverage Petrov had over him. Thompson's voice crackled through their radio. "Alpha Leader, we're in position, ready to create your distraction on your mark." Marcus made a split-second decision that would determine the outcome of the entire operation. Instead of proceeding with the planned distraction, he decided to try a different approach. "Thompson, hold position. I'm going in alone through the rear entrance. Williams, Davis, cover the exits and be ready for immediate extraction." "Boss, that's suicide," Davis protested. "We don't know how many hostiles are in there." Marcus knew Davis was right, but he also knew they needed information more than they needed firepower. The situation was too complex for a standard assault operation. They needed to understand what was really happening before they could figure out how to resolve it. "Rodriguez is trying to protect us," Marcus explained to his team. "That means he's still one of us, regardless of how this looks. I'm going to find out what Petrov has on him and see if we can turn this situation around." Williams intercepted another transmission that provided a crucial piece of information. The civilian emergency beacon wasn't coming from a hostage. It was coming from Rodriguez himself, hidden somewhere on his person. He was secretly calling for help while appearing to cooperate with his captors. "Rodriguez has been trying to signal us all along," Williams realized. "Everything he's done has been about getting us into position to help him, not to harm us." Marcus studied the compound one more time, looking for the best approach to the rear entrance. The building was constructed with multiple levels built into the mountainside, creating a complex layout that would be easy to get lost in, but also offered multiple escape routes. As he prepared to enter the building, Marcus caught sight of movement in one of the windows. A woman appeared briefly, looking out at the valley below. She was young, obviously frightened, and definitely not a willing participant in whatever was happening in the compound. The presence of the woman confirmed that there were innocent people inside, which meant any rescue operation would have to be surgical rather than destructive. It also meant Petrov had additional leverage beyond whatever he was using to control Rodriguez. Marcus signaled to his team and began moving toward the rear entrance. As he approached the building, he could hear voices from inside, including Rodriguez's. But now that he understood Rodriguez was trying to protect rather than betray his team, Marcus began to hear different meanings in his teammates' words. Rodriguez wasn't providing intelligence to help the enemy. He was feeding them information designed to keep Team Alpha safe while giving himself opportunities to signal for help. The entire situation was an elaborate deception, but Rodriguez was the one doing the deceiving, not the one being deceived. The question now was whether Marcus could get inside, extract Rodriguez and any other hostages, and get everyone out before Petrov realized what was happening. And they still had to deal with the incoming special operations team that was apparently under orders to eliminate all witnesses to the operation. As Marcus reached for the door handle, he heard footsteps approaching from inside. Someone was coming toward the rear entrance and he had nowhere to hide. Marcus pressed himself against the stone wall beside the rear entrance as the footsteps grew closer. He could hear someone working the lock mechanism from inside, the metal clicking softly in the morning air. His hand moved instinctively to his sidearm, but he hesitated. Shooting his way out of this situation would only make things worse for everyone inside. The door opened slowly, and Marcus found himself face to face with the young woman he had seen through the window. She was perhaps 25, with dark hair and eyes that showed both intelligence and fear. When she saw Marcus, she didn't scream or run. Instead, she stepped back slightly and whispered in accented English, "You are American soldier? You come for Rodriguez?" Marcus nodded carefully, studying her face for any sign of deception. She gestured for him to follow her inside, moving quietly through a narrow corridor that led deeper into the compound. The interior was more sophisticated than Marcus had expected, with modern lighting and what appeared to be computer equipment visible through doorways. "My name is Elena," she whispered as they moved. "I am translator. They forced me to work for them, but Rodriguez, he tried to help me escape." The pieces of the puzzle began falling into place. Rodriguez hadn't been captured or turned. He had been running his own operation, trying to protect both his team and innocent civilians caught up in whatever Petrov was planning. Elena led Marcus through a maze of corridors built into the natural cave system behind the building. The construction was professional, clearly designed for concealment and defense. This wasn't a temporary hideout. It was a permanent installation that had taken months or years to complete. "How many others are here?" Marcus asked quietly. "Maybe 8-10 men with guns, plus 2 other women like me. Rodriguez, tell me if Americans come, show them secret way to communication room." Marcus realized Rodriguez had been planning for exactly this scenario. His teammate had been preparing for rescue while appearing to cooperate with his captors. It was a dangerous game that required incredible nerve and acting ability. They reached a junction where the corridor split in 3 directions. Elena pointed down the left passage. "Communication room there. Rodriguez there now with Petrov. Very dangerous man, Petrov. He killed people for small mistakes." Marcus checked his watch. Thompson and Johnson would be getting restless, and the incoming special operations team was getting closer. He needed to move fast, but he also needed to be smart about it. "Are there other ways out of here?" he asked Elena. She nodded and pointed to a map sketched on the cave wall. The facility was even larger than Marcus had imagined, with tunnels extending deep into the mountain and multiple exit points scattered across the ridge above. "Rodriguez draw this," Elena explained. "He say if trouble come, use tunnel number 3. It go to valley on other side of mountain." Marcus studied the crude map, memorizing the layout as best he could. Rodriguez had been planning not just for rescue, but for evacuation of multiple people through different routes. His teammate had been thinking several steps ahead while maintaining his cover as a cooperative prisoner. As they approached the communication room, Marcus could hear voices more clearly. Rodriguez was speaking in a tone Marcus had never heard before, cold and professional in a way that didn't match his usual personality. "The intelligence on American operations in this sector is complete," Rodriguez was saying. "But I need guarantees about the civilians before I provide the encryption codes." Petrov's response was sharp with irritation. "You are in no position to make demands. The women are leverage, nothing more. Provide the codes or watch them suffer the consequences. Marcus realized the depth of Rodriguez's situation. His teammate wasn't just protecting Team Alpha. He was protecting Elena and the other civilian translators. Rodriguez had been walking a tightrope, providing enough cooperation to keep everyone alive while secretly working toward their escape. Elena touched Marcus's arm and pointed to a ventilation grate near the ceiling. She made gestures indicating it was possible to access the communication room from above. Rodriguez had apparently planned for multiple approach routes, anticipating different rescue scenarios. As Marcus examined the ventilation system, Williams's voice came through his earpiece in an urgent whisper. "Alpha Leader, we've got movement on the access road. The special ops team is here early, and they're setting up a perimeter around the entire compound." The situation had just become exponentially more dangerous. Marcus was trapped inside the facility with hostile forces outside and limited time to extract Rodriguez and the civilians before the area became a war zone. Marcus made a decision that went against every protocol he had been taught. Instead of attempting a stealth extraction, he decided to reveal himself to Rodriguez directly. His teammate had been managing this situation for days or weeks. Marcus needed Rodriguez's knowledge and planning to get everyone out alive. Elena led him to the ventilation grate, which opened into a storage room adjacent to the communication center. From there, Marcus could see Rodriguez clearly for the first time since the mission began. Rodriguez looked thinner than usual, with dark circles under his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and constant stress, but his posture was alert, and Marcus could see the subtle signs that his teammate was ready for action. Despite his apparent cooperation with Petrov, Marcus caught Rodriguez's attention by making a slight noise against the ventilation grate. Rodriguez's eyes flicked toward the sound for just a moment, but it was enough. A barely perceptible nod told Marcus that Rodriguez had seen him and understood help had arrived. "The encryption codes are stored on a separate device," Rodriguez told Petrov, his voice maintaining the same professional tone. "I'll need to retrieve it from the equipment cache in the storage area." Petrov studied Rodriguez suspiciously. "You will retrieve it under guard. I'm not foolish enough to let you wander around unsupervised." "Of course," Rodriguez agreed. "But the device is sensitive to electromagnetic interference. Your men will need to leave their radios and electronic equipment outside the storage room, or the data could be corrupted." Marcus almost smiled despite the dangerous situation. Rodriguez was creating an opportunity for them to meet without electronic surveillance. His teammate's quick thinking under pressure was exactly what Marcus had hoped for. As Rodriguez and a guard approached the storage room, Marcus positioned himself behind a stack of supply crates. Elena stayed near the ventilation grate, ready to provide warning if additional threats approached. When Rodriguez entered the storage room, Marcus made his presence known with a quiet whistle that only his teammate would recognize. Rodriguez turned slowly, his face showing relief for the first time in what had probably been days. "Marcus," Rodriguez whispered, moving to block the guard's view. "Thank God you're here. This situation is completely insane." "What's really going on here?" Marcus asked quickly, keeping his voice barely audible. "Petrov's running some kind of private intelligence operation. He's been collecting information on special operations throughout the region, building profiles on teams and personnel. I stumbled onto it during what I thought was a routine surveillance mission." Marcus felt pieces of the puzzle clicking into place. "How long have you been here?" 4 days. Petrov captured me, but instead of killing me, he offered a deal. Cooperate and help him gather intelligence on American operations, and he'd let the civilian translators go unharmed. Refuse, and he'd start executing them one by one. The guard was getting impatient outside the storage room. "Hurry up with that device," he called out in accented English. Rodriguez grabbed a small electronic device from one of the crates and showed it to Marcus. "This contains real encryption codes, but not for anything important. I've been feeding Petrov outdated intelligence and false operational data while trying to figure out how to get everyone out safely." Marcus quickly explained about the incoming special operations team and their apparent mission to eliminate all witnesses. Rodriguez's face went pale. "We need to move now," Rodriguez said. "There are 3 civilian women here, plus 8 of Petrov's men. I've identified 3 escape routes, but we'll need to create a significant distraction to get everyone out. Thompson and Johnson are in position outside. Williams and Davis are covering the rear exits. What do you need from us?" Rodriguez outlined a plan that was audacious and dangerous but might be their only chance. Petrov's expecting these encryption codes. If I can convince him to gather his men in the communication room to review the data, Thompson's explosives could seal them in long enough for us to evacuate through the mountain tunnels. Marcus nodded. It was risky, but it addressed their two biggest problems: neutralizing Petrov's forces and avoiding the incoming special operations team. What about the women? Marcus asked. Elena knows the evacuation routes. The other two are being held in a room near the main entrance. We'll need to get them during the distraction. The guard was becoming more aggressive about the delay. Rodriguez grabbed Marcus's shoulder. Give me 60 seconds to get back to Petrov, then signal Thompson to be ready. When I give the code word Phoenix over the radio, hit the communication room with everything he's got. Rodriguez returned to the guard with the device playing his role perfectly. Marcus watched through the ventilation grate as his teammate walked calmly back toward the communication room, carrying what Petrov believed were valuable military secrets. Elena appeared beside Marcus, her face tense with worry. The other women, they are scared. They do not know about escape plan. Marcus realized they had another complication. If the civilian translators panicked during the evacuation, it could compromise the entire operation. They needed someone the women trusted to guide them through the escape route. Can you get to them and explain what's happening? Marcus asked Elena. She nodded. I think so. But if guards see me away from workstation, they become suspicious. Marcus checked his watch. The special operations team would be in position soon, and their window of opportunity was closing rapidly. Everything depended on precise timing and a considerable amount of luck. Rodriguez's voice came through the radio, speaking to his team with words that sounded like routine updates but carried coded meanings they had established during previous missions. Alpha Leader, the package is secure and ready for delivery. Recommend Phoenix protocol in 60 seconds. Marcus smiled grimly. Despite everything Rodriguez had endured, his teammate was still thinking like a professional soldier, using established procedures to coordinate complex operations under pressure. The next 60 seconds would determine whether they all made it out alive or became casualties in a shadow war that most people would never know existed. The explosion shook the entire mountain. Thompson's charges didn't just seal the communication room, they brought down a section of the cave ceiling, trapping Petrov and his key lieutenants behind tons of rock and debris. The blast was so powerful that Marcus felt the concussion through the stone walls even from his position in the storage area. Elena grabbed his arm as dust and small rocks rained down from above. We go now, very fast, she said, her voice tight with urgency. Marcus followed her through corridors that were rapidly filling with smoke and dust. Emergency lighting flickered on, casting eerie shadows on the cave walls. Behind them, he could hear shouting and confusion as Petrov's remaining men tried to figure out what had happened. They reached the holding area where the other two civilian translators were imprisoned, just as Rodriguez appeared from another corridor, moving quickly but calmly despite the chaos around them. His teammate had somehow managed to separate from Petrov's group before the explosion, probably using the confusion to slip away. The main exit is compromised, Rodriguez reported. I saw muzzle flashes outside. The special ops team is engaging anyone who tries to leave through the front. Marcus wasn't surprised. The incoming team would have orders to contain the situation completely, regardless of who got caught in the crossfire. They were now trapped between Petrov's surviving forces inside the compound and their own military outside. Rodriguez quickly explained the situation to the two frightened women while Elena translated. Both were young, probably linguistics students who had been recruited for what they thought was legitimate translation work. The terror in their eyes made Marcus angry at whatever forces had put innocent people in this position. The tunnel system extends for almost a mile through the mountain, Rodriguez explained as they moved toward one of the escape routes he had mapped. It comes out on the far side of the ridge, well away from the current engagement zone. As they made their way through the tunnels, Marcus could hear explosions and gunfire echoing from the main compound. The special operations team was apparently not taking any chances, using heavy weapons to systematically destroy the facility. Thompson's voice came through the radio, barely audible through the static caused by tons of rock between them and the outside world. Alpha Leader were pinned down at the front entrance. multiple hostiles and what looks like friendly fire from the south ridge. Marcus realized their extraction was becoming exponentially more complicated. Thompson and Johnson were caught between Petrov's men and the special operations team, and Marcus was deep underground with Rodriguez and 3 civilians. Williams, Davis, what's your status? Marcus called into his radio. We're mobile and heading for tunnel exit number 3 as briefed, Davis responded. But we've got company following us. At least 4 hostiles broke off from the main group. Rodriguez studied the crude map he had sketched on the tunnel wall. If Davis and Williams can reach exit 3, they can provide cover for our extraction. But we need to move fast. Some of Petrov's men know about these tunnels. As if to emphasize his point, they could hear voices and footsteps echoing from somewhere behind them in the tunnel system. Petrov's surviving forces were pursuing them, and the confined space of the tunnels would make any firefight extremely dangerous. Elena was helping the other 2 women navigate the rough tunnel floor, but their pace was slower than Marcus would have liked. The women were wearing inappropriate footwear for mountain terrain, and the stress of the situation was affecting their physical performance. How much farther to the exit? Marcus asked Rodriguez. Maybe 10 minutes at normal pace, but these tunnels can be tricky. There are several false passages that lead to dead ends. I've only been through this route once, and that was in daylight. The sound of pursuing footsteps was getting closer. Marcus made a tactical decision that he hoped wouldn't get them all killed. Rodriguez, take the women and continue toward the exit. I'll delay the pursuit and catch up with you. Like hell, Rodriguez replied immediately. We've been through too much together for you to play hero now. Marcus was about to argue when Elena spoke up. I know these tunnels better than anyone. My father was geologist who explored these caves before war. I can get everyone to exit safely, but you must stop men who follow us. It was the solution Marcus had been hoping for. Elena had knowledge of the terrain that neither he nor Rodriguez possessed, and she was motivated to protect the other women. Rodriguez could provide security for the group while Marcus dealt with the pursuit. Go, Marcus told Rodriguez. I'll buy you 15 minutes, then follow. If I'm not at the exit in 20 minutes, continue without me. Rodriguez clasped Marcus's shoulder. Don't do anything stupid. We need you alive to explain this mess to command. As Rodriguez and the women disappeared into the darkness ahead, Marcus prepared for what would probably be the most difficult fighting of his career. The tunnel was narrow, with limited cover and no room for maneuvering. It would be a close-quarters battle where superior firepower would matter less than quick reflexes and tactical positioning. Marcus found a section where the tunnel curved sharply, creating a natural ambush point. He positioned himself behind a rock formation that would provide some protection while allowing him to control access to the passage beyond. The first pursuer appeared around the curve less than 2 minutes later. The man was moving cautiously but not carefully enough. Marcus's suppressed pistol coughed once and the threat was eliminated silently. But the man hadn't been alone. Marcus could hear at least 3 more sets of footsteps approaching, and these men would be more cautious now that they knew they were walking into a defended position. American soldier, a voice called out in heavily accented English. You cannot escape. Surrender now and we will make your death quick. Marcus didn't respond. In the confined space of the tunnel, conversation would only give away his exact position. Instead, he prepared for a fighting withdrawal, planning to fall back through the tunnel system while inflicting maximum casualties on his pursuers. The next few minutes were a deadly game of cat and mouse, with Marcus using his knowledge of the tunnel layout to stay ahead of Petrov's men, while picking them off one by one. The enclosed space amplified every sound, making it difficult to determine exact positions, but it also meant that any mistake would be immediately fatal. When Marcus finally reached the tunnel exit, he found Rodriguez and the women safely positioned behind cover, with Davis and Williams providing overwatch from elevated positions. The exit opened onto a small valley completely hidden from the main compound, exactly as Rodriguez had planned. Took you long enough, Rodriguez said with a grin that didn't quite hide his relief. Marcus was about to respond when Elena pointed to movement on the ridge above them. The special operations team had apparently expanded their search pattern and was now sweeping the area systematically. We need to move again, Davis called down from his position. Multiple contacts approaching from the north and they're not playing around. Marcus looked at his team and the 3 civilian women they had risked everything to save. They were all exhausted, low on ammunition, and still miles from any safe extraction point. But they were alive and they were together. Where to now? Williams asked. Rodriguez pulled out a larger map that showed the entire region. There's a village about 8 miles south of here. It's controlled by forces friendly to the Americans, and they have communications equipment that can reach our command. Marcus studied the map, calculating distances and travel times. 8 miles through hostile territory with 3 civilians would take most of the day, assuming they could avoid the various forces now searching for them. Marcus had been thinking about the same issue. The willingness to accept casualties among their own forces suggested either a massive failure of communication or a deliberate decision to prioritize political considerations over soldier safety. Maybe that's something we'll never know, Marcus replied. But we know we can count on each other, and that's what matters most. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Marcus reflected on the lessons learned from their experience. Military operations were becoming increasingly complex, with political, technological, and moral considerations that weren't always addressed in traditional training programs. But the fundamental principles remained unchanged. Take care of your teammates, protect innocent people when possible, and maintain your integrity regardless of the pressure to compromise your values. The mission in Afghanistan had tested all of those principles, and Marcus was proud that his team had met those challenges successfully. Whatever operations awaited them in the future, they would face them with the confidence that comes from having been tested under the most difficult circumstances imaginable. Rodriguez stood up and stretched, looking more relaxed than he had in months. I'm thinking about extending my enlistment, he announced. Turns out I'm pretty good at this job, even when everything goes completely wrong. Marcus smiled. If Rodriguez was ready to continue serving despite everything he had endured, it meant the team would remain intact for future operations. And given the complexity of modern threats, Marcus suspected they would need that unity sooner rather than later. Same here, Marcus said. But next time, let's try to avoid getting caught between multiple hostile forces while protecting civilians and evading our own military. Where's the fun in that? Thompson asked with a grin. As they walked back toward the barracks, Marcus felt a sense of completion that had been missing since their return from Afghanistan. The mission was truly over, the team was intact, and they were ready for whatever challenges lay ahead. The whispered question that had started their ordeal, who took the shot, had been answered. But more importantly, they had discovered that the bonds of trust and loyalty between teammates could survive even the most complex and dangerous circumstances. In a world where nothing was simple, and every decision carried unforeseen consequences, that knowledge was worth more than any commendation or official recognition.